Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Pressing Issues. Today's episode for May 5th, 2020. I'd like to introduce my illustrious panel for today. First up, and new to the show, we have Marcy Smith.
Hello.
Welcome, Marcy. And we also have David Smith.
Hey, everyone. Good to be here tonight.
Dave, do you want to admit that you're related to Marcy or not yet?
Of course. She'll make much better points to me tonight. So, yes, I'll hang on our coattails.
And joining us once again, Ashley Jasmer.
Hello.
All right, welcome everybody. We're going to get started with today's show. We have a couple of topics to cover today. We're going to talk about what's going on at Shanghai Disneyland in terms of their reopenings and testing and social distancing. And then we're going to get into a discussion of the value of a trip to Walt Disney World after they reopen, given that a lot of things are going to be either unavailable or scaled back, and restaurants are going to be more expensive since they raised prices while they were closed. So that's going to be the second half of the show. But let's kick it off today talking about what's new as far as coronavirus and closures and where things are with the Disney theme parks in the United States. We've seen some reopening task forces come into effect in Florida and California. We know that Bob Iger is on the reopening task force in California, and we know that Walt Disney World President Josh D'Amaro is on the reopening task force in Florida. But we don't have anything in terms of dates yet, and it's looking, there's been some word that it looks like California might be slower to reopen than Florida. Florida has reopened some beaches thus far on the coast. California opened a beach, and so many people showed up that they decided, well, can't do that, shut them back down. So in terms of the social distancing that's required for reopening of parks, it's kind of anybody's guess how that's going to work out once the parks reopen. But over in Shanghai, and Bob Iger said during one of his interviews that, you know, the decisions that they make in reopening the Walt Disney parks in the United States are going to be based on how things go in China with reopening, and if there's any secondary spread of coronavirus when they start to relax the social distancing requirements. And in that vein, Shanghai Disneyland, which had started to reopen all the way back in March, in the beginning of second week in March, they opened their shopping area, parts of their shopping area, Disneytown. They opened one of the restaurants at the Shanghai Disneyland Resort. Since then, we've seen character dining resume at Lumiere's Kitchen in the Shanghai Disneyland Hotel. And the China health QR codes that were rolled out in that country are obviously required at all venues for guests going into any of the venues in the Shanghai Disney Resort. And so last week we got, this is almost 2 weeks ago at this point, it looked like Shanghai was testing some parades and the castle shows to see how things were going to go. And in terms of shows at indoor theaters, how they were going to seat guests, there was some testing with guests being seated in every other row and parties separated by empty seats in between. So filling all the available space was not something you heard. And so if we think about what's happening in Shanghai Disneyland, it looks like they're essentially doing what we might expect in terms of social distancing, reduced capacity at theme park venues, reduced capacity at restaurants, and although there's been no reopening date set for Shanghai Disneyland yet. Schools are starting to reopen in China, and in Shanghai in particular. Schools are starting to reopen, and they're supposed to be completely reopened by next week, May 11th. And so it looks like it's with schools open, and I guess as long as they don't see, rapid increase in COVID cases, that Shanghai Disneyland might get to reopen soon. So we will see. But the task forces in Florida and California are certainly going to direct what happens at those parks. And at this point, we don't have any information. Disney hasn't made any statements about what's happening. The task forces, as we talked about last week, have set up some guidelines for phased reopenings and what can happen in each phase, which businesses are allowed to open in which phase, and of course it looks like theme parks are all the way at the end of the plan, certainly not in phase one. I know Florida is now in phase one, and certain things have opened in Florida, but theme parks are not until phase three. Anyone have any thoughts or comments on that? I know, Ashley, you weren't here last week, where we talked about this quite a bit, and Marcy, you're new, so welcome to Pressing Issues, and we'd like to hear any of your thoughts as well.
Well, I know you guys had talked about last week that Disney had initially said that, was it Disney or the state of Florida, that they could open with 50% capacity?
I think that was the state said that when they opened it would be at 50% capacity, but that still wasn't until phase 3, I believe.
Yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about it. Obviously, it's different for people who live in Florida. I mean, we live in New York. I don't see us driving down there for any phased opening, just because between having to bring children and figure out what to do with dogs now that we probably can't have our dog sitter come and stay at our house like they normally would have. I don't know that we would, I mean, even 50% I feel seems high to me, because we've been there before when it was super crowded, and I know it was nowhere near 100% capacity. So I think even with 50% capacity, it's still going to be kind of high. So I'm not sure. I mean, I'm honestly very interested to see what Disney actually comes out with and what they're really going to do. And like you guys said last week, I just don't know what point it would even be lucrative for them to do it. I mean, at what point would they even break even? I mean, if they had to do, say, 25% to be safe, on the safe side, would they just lose money by opening the park and having to pay all the staff and having to pay all of the fee, everything that comes with running a theme park, just to have 25% of the crowds coming through the door? I don't know if that would even be worth it for them. So it's definitely going to be really interesting to see how it plays out and what actually happens.
Ashley,
That's
your
a
thoughts?
good point.
Right.
Oh, well, yeah, that's a good point. My only thought in listening to all this again and thinking about how they're going to do it in Shanghai, I mean, you always hear about people, and especially in the foreign parks, about, for the most part, how nice, how polite they are, how much they comply with cast members' instructions. That's what makes me nervous for Florida and Disneyland. Like, people already routinely, like, we make the comment all the time, we can't have nice things because people don't follow instructions. So
That applies
my
in
theory,
Shanghai.
does it? Okay. Well, I don't know.
Yeah,
like,
it really does.
You just hear generally like that they're typically better about following directions than American guests are. And so, like talking about testing where people, sit in assigned places throughout the rows and sections, like, again, people have big issues with that already here. Like, that's my big curiosity. Like, how well are guests going to acclimate to a new normal at Disney? Because they don't do very well with it already. As far as following directions,
They didn't do well with the old normal.
Things like that. They didn't, and that's my worry. Like, everybody, for the most part, and it's unfortunate, but you see it more and more, or at least you did right up the past couple of years. People have a sense of entitlement at Disney, and it's really sad because the cast members wind up getting abused, and they can't follow directions, and then you just have a bunch of people screaming at them all day because they can't do what they want to do because it's not safe for this or that. So I really do wonder if all of this is, you're going to see a shift in the guests where they're going to be more likely to follow directions and understand and not just feel entitled to do what they want to do, because, I could very much see it, a few bad apples ruin the bunch. And if people can't follow directions and abide by the new guidelines, such as social distancing in queues or sitting in particular places, that they're just going to have to close the parks again because it's too much of a risk. And I would hate to see that happen.
I don't know how it is where you guys are, but people aren't really social distancing now. I mean, yeah. So, I mean, this is like simple everyday stuff. Like, this is at the grocery store. This is at gas stations. This is just like normal life in general. Has nothing to do with like, oh, I paid, $3,000 for my family just to have tickets to come here, and I want to do this. This is like, I need to get to the grocery store and hopefully find some toilet paper. Like, this is like everyday life, and people aren't social distancing now. I mean, and I don't, in New York, we're supposed to be wearing face masks when we go out in public, and we were out today and we all had face masks on, and I would say probably 90% of people who I saw did not. So it's like, I mean, I don't know. And then how would Disney even enforce it? Like, are they really going to have cast members go up to guests and say, hey, you're not wearing a face mask, you can't get in? How are they going to deal with like the inevitable crying and complaining and hair pulling and foot stomping that the average, I mean, not even just the average American, I'd say like most people are probably going to be doing if they can't even follow simple directions now.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Marcy. I think you hit the nail on the head in terms of what I'm thinking is that how is Disney going to enforce any of this? Because they're bad at enforcing the rules that they used to have. And these rules are going to be more stringent and more specific. And if Disney doesn't really, if Disney does as poor of a job enforcing these new social distancing rules and mask rules or whatever as they have with any of the rules that they had in place before and never really enforced, that's a great question. So, obviously you can refuse to let somebody through the turnstiles if they don't have a mask on, but what do you do when they get through and then they take the mask off and refuse to put it back on? I mean, is a cast member gonna call security and have them escorted out of the park? Like, that's not something that had been done in the past when guests violate rules. How strict are they going to be, and how seriously are they going to enforce these things? Because I also think, if the reopening plan has these specific practices in place and Disney doesn't enforce them, then it's certainly probable, or at least possible, that the state of Florida is going to come in and say, look, Disney, if you can't enforce the rules that we've set in place that allow you to reopen, then you're going to have to shut down again. I don't necessarily see that happening, but the possibility's there. And I think, once the parks reopen, you're going to have, WDWNT is going to have our reporters at the parks to see how things are going and let everybody know what's happening. You're certainly going to see pictures, and you're going to see how many people in those pictures have masks on and how many don't, if that's the requirement. And, I'm sure that's going to spark a huge Twitter war, as things always do, with, half the world saying these people should be kicked out of the park because they're not complying with the rules, and the other half saying it's their God-given right to not wear a mask.
With that though, like, especially if they do a good job about publicizing it, which I have a feeling they will, if it's an expectation, technically Second Amendment, and especially in Florida of all places, you can carry a gun just about anywhere, but you can't carry it on Disney property. Like, that would be the only place where I would draw the line. Like, it's private property. So to say that I don't have to wear a mask and those kinds of people, I'm not going to feel sorry for them, because it's a rule. It's like any other rule. You got to follow the rule or you're going to get kicked out. But I will be curious to see, and I already preemptively feel bad for the poor cast members that are going to have to try to enforce that, because that's going to be a royal pain. Because no matter what they say, there's going to be people that try to argue with them, and that's going to be terrible for them. And I feel so bad.
Right. And
I feel
what
like,
I find
though,
interesting about...
Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
What I find interesting about this thing, though, is, and we're seeing, I think, the results of having high-level Disney executives on these task force, is if you look at the guidelines for Orange County, Florida for theme park reopening, it does not mandate that guests wear masks. It mandates that employees wear masks, and it has several other mandates for the company to go to wipe down surfaces and have touchless hand sanitizer at every location and those. But it does not mandate that guests have to wear masks. I think they're trying to avoid the issue altogether by not saying that, which tells me either they think they're going to leave it up to the guest discretion, which, I don't know what that does to potential attendance, or they think they're going to wait long enough to reopen that they won't need to specify masks for the visiting public.
That's a valid point.
I feel like, yes, it is a valid point. However, I honestly feel like if Disney does say guests are going to need to wear masks, at least maybe in certain situations, maybe if you're in a situation where you can't properly socially distance, like a queue, or there are going to be places that you probably aren't going to be able to stay 6 feet away from someone else. So if you're in that type of situation, maybe they would say, okay, if you can't socially distance, please put your mask on. And I feel like Disney has an opportunity to come out strong with this kind of thing, and they need just maybe one or two people to make examples of, and then people will know, okay, I need to wear my mask, otherwise I'm going to be escorted out of the park.
But the question is, will they do it? To Jason's point, they're already terrible at enforcing rules as it is. I mean, about the only time that you really see them enforced if it's like a major safety issue. But otherwise, I mean, people are doing crazy things. I mean, again, we can't have nice things because people can't follow the rules and follow directions. So I don't know. I don't know that. I hope that they would enforce it, but I don't think that they will. And I think that's going to create an even bigger problem for them, that they're going to try to come out strong, but they're not going to be able to enforce it. People aren't going to take it seriously. And then who knows? I mean, to Jason's point, the state of Florida may mandate that they close again, which to my mind would be more detrimental and worse than if they just waited to open until they didn't have to have any type of restrictions. Versus trying to open and enforce rules.
They have an opportunity also.
Good at enforcing.
Yeah, they have an opportunity right now when they first open to say these are the rules and we're going to stick with these rules. Because, like, for instance, the one guy who climbed the pyramid in Mexico, if they didn't escort the guy out of the park and say you're not doing that, you're not going to do that, they would have people trying to do that every day. So I feel like if they come out and say, okay, these are the rules, this is what you have to abide by if you want to come to the park, and within the first week, if they have people not following those rules, they need to say, they have the opportunity to be able to say, we are going to enforce this. And if they don't, then people are going to do whatever they want to do. If they are able to enforce it and come on strong, then people will know that they're not joking around, and they're going to be able to think to themselves, okay, if we want to go to Disney, this is what we have to do.
Go ahead, David. Did you want to say something?
So, yeah, I mean, I think if we're learning anything about the state of Florida governing system, is that they're not going to take action against Disney unless something significant happens. So I wouldn't look for them to shut things down. In fact, it was interesting in one of the press conferences that that they had. This was before the Orange County press conference. They referred to a gentleman by the name of Chuck Whittle, who's president of Unicor, whose statement was basically, "Let the theme parks open when they feel they're ready, and let them determine what they need to stay safe, and let's stay out of their hair." It feels to me like that is what the government of Florida, the government of Orange County, Osceola County, they're going to try to stay out of specifics with theme parks and let Disney decide. I think only if they see a significant outbreak again will they take action.
Yeah, I think you're right, David. I think certainly the government, or at least this Chuck Whitmer guy, realizes that the theme parks probably understand their business and their processes better than anybody in the state or local government in Florida does. There is certainly the opportunity to say, look, theme parks, you do what you want, because if you screw up, it's your business that's on the line. So yeah, I think in some ways that makes a lot of sense. That is, it makes it easier for the state and local government to not have to worry about all these specific precautions that they don't know necessarily whether they're going to work or not in a theme park environment. It forces the theme parks to be responsible for their own policies. You know, what Marcy said about, you know, they have the opportunity to come out and start making sure they enforce things on day one when they reopen. I think that's going to be a big thing. They're going to have to set a precedent that these are the rules and they're going to enforce them. And whether it has to do with a mask or queue lines or whatever, I think absolutely they need to come out strong and enforce the rules. And I think one thing that's going to be on their side in terms of being able to do that is that it's likely that the cast members that are going to be working when the parks reopen, obviously we know all the international program cast members and college program cast members have been sent home. So the cast members that are going to be working when the parks reopen are going to be ones that have been there for quite a while. They're going to be the ones that know how people act. They're going to be the ones that know what people are going to try to pull. And they're hopefully going to be the ones that are more comfortable enforcing the rules. And so I think that's a good thing. That's going to be certainly in the best interest of the parks to have these cast members there that are comfortable enforcing the rules, which I think, you know, maybe college program members are not. So having seasoned cast members in place when the parks reopen are going to help that. But yeah, I do absolutely think, whether it has to do with masks, whether it has to do with where people stand in line, you know, all those things are going to be relevant. And if it's left up to the theme parks to decide, that's not a bad thing. My only concern, well, my biggest concern is going to be something like they focus, you know, and we talked about this a little bit last week too, this social distancing thing and this 6-foot measurement, and whether 6 feet is just a number that somebody plucked out of the sky, and whether it means anything, and whether there's any scientific evidence to back it up. My concern is that, you know, you're going to stand 6 feet apart in a queue, maybe, for example. I'm thinking, you know, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, if you're in the queue for Rise of the Resistance or whatever, you know, you can stand 6 feet apart in that queue. That's fine. The queue capacity will drop to maybe 1/3 as many guests in the queue at a time or whatever. The problem isn't that you're going to be 5 feet away from the person in front of you. The problem is that you or your kids or somebody else's kids or the person 25 feet in front of you is either going to be sneezing, or their kids are going to be sneezing, or their kids are going to be touching everything. That's what's going to spread the disease. It's not being 5 feet away from somebody versus 6 feet away. That's not how the disease spreads. Especially in a theme park environment, the disease is going to spread by touching surfaces that somebody else touched to spread the disease. And so my biggest concern is that they're going to put in these rules in place, the 6 feet social distancing. We saw pictures from Shanghai where they have tape all over the walkways that show people where to stand and this and that. That's all well and good, and maybe it's necessary, but I don't think that in and of itself is going to stop the spread of the virus, because I think in a theme park environment there's too many surfaces that too many people touch. Even if you go, I mean, even as far as like cash registers, and you have to, put in your PIN number with your Magic Band and things like that. Those are the surfaces that are going to spread the virus much faster than somebody who's, 4 feet away from you instead of 6 feet. And I know around me, different places, different restaurants with drive-through or curbside pickup, or the grocery stores or whatever. Different ones have different policies in place. I mean, some drive-throughs have come up with a plan where they hand you your food through the drive-through window in a plastic sort of bin, and so the person that takes your money and gives you your change or gives you your credit card back is never touching your bag of food. The person who prepared the food puts the bag of food in the plastic bin, and the person at the window puts the plastic bin out the window, and you grab the bag. So there's some, that's a great solution, I think, in terms of contact points and touch points to stop virus spread, but other restaurants don't. Other restaurants, the person that's at the window isn't even wearing a mask, let alone have any kind of system in place so that they don't touch your bag of food. So, these things like, and I've complained, I've gone into stores where, I buy something and it's $12 and I still have to sign the receipt. I've complained. I'm like, you don't need me to sign that receipt. And for $12, it's not required by the credit card companies. And me touching that pen that you're trying to give me is much more dangerous than if everybody in the store wasn't wearing a mask. So those are the kinds of things, I think putting in your PIN number in the Magic Band when you want to pay for something with a Magic Band or whatever, like there are a lot of systems and technologies that could be implemented to reduce surface contact points that are, going to be touched by hundreds and hundreds of people a day. And I think that's so much more important than, whether the person in front of you is 4 feet or 5 feet or 6 feet away. And I think that's my thought is that in general, that kind of thing is going to come to light as states start to reopen. And whether it's Disney World or not, I think that whole kind of thing is going to come to light where it's much more critical to disinfect and wipe down surfaces than it is to force people to, sit every third row in a theater. Just because if you're sitting, 4 feet away from somebody, there's a much higher likelihood that the person that comes in next and sits in that same seat has a much higher risk of contracting the virus than you who sat 3 seats away. And so that social distancing, to the max is like the whole theater was empty and then the next person came in. But if the chairs weren't wiped down and you sat in the same chair and put your hands on the same armrest without it being wiped down in between audiences, that's a much bigger problem than a person who's sitting 4 seats away from you. That's my opinion. I'm a scientist. It's not, it's my scientific thoughts on this. There's no clinical studies or whatever. I mean, there's clinical studies out there that talk about respiratory droplets traveling 20 some feet, and not just 6 feet and this and that. But that's kind of my thought as to what's going to happen when things start to reopen, whether it's related to Disney World or not. And I mean, you can feel free to disagree with me. That's fine. But I think this whole thing, I mean, we saw, the days before the Disney parks closed when they said they were disinfecting surfaces and this and that, and they weren't disinfecting the touch points and still forcing people to put their fingers on the fingerprint readers. I mean, those fingerprint readers are probably 100 times more likely to spread coronavirus than somebody that's standing 4 feet away. So
Jason,
I think. Go ahead.
Do you think that then in reality, once Disney starts opening, once Walt Disney World, Disneyland starts opening, that you would say that if someone's going to go, then they have to pretty much be okay with the possibility that they're going to get sick?
I mean, in my mind, yeah. I think I think this will play out over the next month or so as certain cities and certain states start to reopen. You're going to see this happen, that we know that there can be asymptomatic carriers. You know, they talk about temperature checks. Bob Iger talked about temperature checks. Let me tell you two things. Not everyone who has coronavirus has a fever, and not everyone who has a fever has coronavirus. So temperature checks maybe will catch, I don't know, some X% of people and keep them out of the parks. But there's nowhere near 100% certainty that a temperature check is going to keep out anyone who has the virus. People can have the virus, they don't know it, they don't have a temperature, they don't show any symptoms. So yeah, I mean, just like going to the grocery store and you know, putting your credit card in and signing with a pen or the signing on the screen or whatever, you know, if that person in front of you had coronavirus and they were an asymptomatic carrier, you may have touched a surface that they touched, and you may have coronavirus on your fingertips. And if you touch your face or rub your nose, yeah, you could be contaminating yourself. So that's where I think, you know, it doesn't. A lot of these things that they're putting in place don't really. They're not getting to the root of the problem. I mean, sure, social distancing helps. Sure, staying 6 feet away helps. Well, yeah, that's very true. And I think the temperature checks are absolutely going to be for show. I mean, you're in Florida in July. Everybody's temperature is going to be over 100 degrees because it's 100 degrees outside. I think just like the bag checks we've, you know, talked about in the past, just like the bag checks aren't really effective and they're pretty much for show and to make people feel better, I think temperature checks are the same way. And I think the 6-foot distancing guidelines are pretty much the same way. Sure, they help. Just like, sure, a bag check, you know, once in a while finds a guy with a gun, but that doesn't tell you how many people with guns got through the bag check without being found, because we don't know those numbers. Just like we don't know the numbers of how many people have coronavirus and don't show any symptoms and don't show a temperature. And until we know those numbers, I think, yeah, you're pretty much going to have to be willing to accept the risk that you're going to catch something. I mean, just like the flu, just like any other common cold, you know, and just like going to a grocery store, it's not any different going to the Disney parks, except for the fact there's more people, which means there's more people who are going to be carrying coronavirus, whether symptomatic or not. And so there's a higher risk, and that's going to play itself out through any venue, anywhere, over the next month or two or three as states start to reopen larger venues and restaurants and things like that have frequent contact with the public, with multiple people without being disinfected.
Yeah, I feel like it's really very different.
Yep.
Sorry. I feel like it's very different than going to the grocery store, though, because first of all, if you're smart, you're going and you're getting what you need and you're leaving. So you're not staying there all day. You're not there from park open to park close. You're also, I mean, if you're like me, you're going in with the mask, you're going in with gloves, you're going in with, you know, I have my hair tucked under something like a hood, so that stuff, you know, some random person doesn't sneeze on me. When I get out into the car, I take my gloves off, I throw my gloves out, I'm disinfecting the steering wheel. When I'm done, I'm wiping my groceries down. You know, I feel like if I were to go to Disney within the next few months that it's going to be open, I would feel a lot of the responsibility is on me, because I have to make sure that I'm taking every precaution that I can, and not just putting it on Disney. Because just like with the grocery store, they can say, okay, well, you have to stand 6 feet away, you have to try and social distance, you have to wear a mask. But if you're also, but then there's also people who don't do that. There's somebody who comes right up to you. Some guy touched my cart the other day. I'm like, why are you touching my stuff? So it's like people just don't, people do what they want to do, basically. So you have to really, you can't just rely on Disney, is what I'm saying. Is like you have to take responsibility for your own health as well, and also just do whatever you can do to protect yourself. And I guess that would lead to the question, do you even go to Disney at that point? Because the grocery store, you need food to survive. Walt Disney World, as much as I love it and I would absolutely love to go, I probably won't be going for a while.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, certainly, you need food to survive. You don't need Disney to survive, unless, of course, you're Tom Corliss and all you eat is Disney food, and then you do need Disney to survive. But anyway, I think you're right, and I think you said you go to the grocery store and you're in and out and you get what you need, and you're only there for 15-20 minutes. That's not going to work at Walt Disney World. You're going to go to Disney World, and especially with reduced capacity and longer waits or whatever, you're gonna want to stay at the parks and do what you want to do. And I think when the chance of from what I heard you say, Marcy, is that the chance of catching coronavirus at the grocery store is a lot less than at Walt Disney World, and I 100% agree. But you're at a grocery store and you pick up a box of cereal. Well, what if somebody had that box of cereal 10 minutes ago and sneezed on it and then decided they don't like that cereal, they want a different kind, and put it back on the shelf? I mean, that's essentially the same as touching the handrails in all of the queues in any ride at Walt Disney World. Except for
I'm
when
also
you touch that
wiping
box
down
of
the
cereal.
box of cereal when I get home.
Well, there you go.
And
Exactly,
washing my
and
hands,
that's the difference.
I'm at Disney all day, and I say, okay, if I touch the handrail, then I'm like, okay, well, I need to go get something to eat. Even if I say I'm not going to eat anything, so I'm just going to grab a drink. You could be touching your straw. You could be unless you're literally washing your hand, which I mean, I'm very avid hand washer. But if you are not washing your hands every time you touch a surface, you're potentially exposing yourself.
Right, and my point is that can happen at the grocery store just like it can happen at Walt Disney World. But as you said, you get home from the grocery store and you wash your hands and you wipe down boxes and things, and you can't really do that at Walt Disney World. I mean, I guess you could certainly carry a whole pack of Clorox wipes and wipe the handrails as you walk through. I mean,
I can't
that's
find
the
Clorox
kind of
wipes,
thing.
so...
No, you can't. Disney will have to provide them for you. But if Disney gave everybody a box of Clorox wipes and said, hey, wipe down the handrails as you walk through the queue, that'd be great, because people would probably do it. At least some people would do it. And they wouldn't have to pay cast members to do it. And they'd have to pay for the Clorox wipes one way or the other. So, who knows? Maybe that's an idea that they'll put into place.
They already have a model for that on the cruise ship.
They do?
Because when you walk in a restaurant on the cruise ship, they hand you a disinfectant wipe.
Yep.
So, I think the company should be taking measures like that. I don't think people should expect the company to have eradicated coronavirus in their parks. I think there's still a level of responsibility.
On a happy note with all of this, though. Sorry. On a happy, can we just, in an effort to make it a slightly more positive turn, can we talk for a second about the over-under on all the cute, coronavirus merch that is going to come out? They've already kind of tested the waters with the masks, and they're for charity, which is great. But I'm picturing, themed masks, themed hand sanitizer pouches that will, clip to the back of your stroller or what have you, or your bag. I'm picturing, the little things of hand sanitizer that will clip to your bag.
Mickey Hazmat.
I would not be.
Yeah.
Yes, I mean, it'd be kind of nice to see I won't be surprised if that's what happens. Like,
I mean, I'm waiting for them to come out with like pins with the Fab Five all wearing masks.
Right? Like, no, but I'm talking about stuff like you can actually use in the parks. Like, if they come out with like a series of like almost like Tsum Tsums or something, and they've kind of done it with like lip smackers, but they're not keychains, but like having almost like the Bath and Body Works like keychain pouches that hold the hand sanitizer, that would be amazing. I would collect all of them, and they would be perfect. Sell them, give them away with the park admission ticket. So, you know, with the Clorox wipes.
Yeah, no, and David, like you said, like on the cruise line, there's no reason why the greeters that are at the entrance of pretty much every single attraction can't have a bottle of sanitizer just like they do on the cruise lines when you go into a restaurant. You know, they spray that on your hands as you walk into a queue. The problem is that, you know, if the virus is airborne from somebody sneezing, then the wipes and the hand sanitizer only go so far. But I think we also kind of know that it's not, the transmission isn't necessarily air-to-air transmission between people. It's more air to surface, surface to hand, hand to face kind of thing. But yeah, I think if they haven't started to design and manufacture all sorts of like character hand sanitizer products and things like that, then they need somebody new in charge of merchandising, because to me that's like a no-brainer. It makes perfect sense. People will buy it. People want souvenirs. Why not get a souvenir that's useful and can keep you healthy? At least you know, help keep you healthy. But yeah, I think everybody here's the problem is, you know, some people say, well, I'm not going to go to the parks until there's a vaccine. Some people say, I'm not going to go to the parks until there's a drug that will cure or lessen the severity of coronavirus or whatever. I would have said, you know, I'm not going to go to the parks until there's a measles vaccine. Well, you know what? There's a measles vaccine, and there's people in Washington State where there's measles outbreaks because not enough people have the vaccine. There's not the herd immunity in place. So the question is, all right, they come out tomorrow with a coronavirus vaccine. How long is it going to take for everybody in this country to be vaccinated? And how many people are not going to get vaccinated, and then how many people need to be vaccinated? What percentage of the population needs to be vaccinated in order to have herd immunity? Those are all real questions, and I think you know, just because they come out with a vaccine tomorrow doesn't mean it's safe to go to Disney World, because there's still going to be people that go that aren't vaccinated, that are asymptomatic carriers, and you run the risk of catching it. So even though, you know, a lot of people have been saying this, you know, for a while, and I've seen it in the chat for weeks now, people are saying, you know, I won't go until there's a vaccine. Well, you know, a vaccine is great, and I think it's something that we need. The question is, how long is it going to take after a vaccine comes out and gets approved and you know, is shown to be effective? How long is it going to take for enough people in this country to be vaccinated that it's sort of safe to go back to some normalcy like we had in the past? So for me,
typically with a vaccine, though, are even. Sorry. Typically with a vaccine, though, if you're vaccinated and then you're exposed to whatever it is, if you catch it, at least with the flu, I know it's much less severe, supposedly, if you get vaccinated, right? So
I think it depends on the type
and
of vaccine.
The flu is a bad example because you know, there's many different strains of the flu, and some years
it changes every year. Yeah.
Right. Some years the vaccine covers most of the strains that are in circulation, and some years it doesn't. So that's not necessarily a great example. I think the coronavirus, they're pretty sure there's only really one strain, and it's not mutating a lot. So that means that a coronavirus, if you have a vaccine, you're not likely to catch it, or at the very least, your body's has the antibodies in place to fight it off, and so it's going to be a very mild set of symptoms. But yeah, I mean, that's the case for most vaccines.
The real danger would be then for those who either can't get the vaccine for like health reasons or choose not to get the vaccine. Because if you get vaccinated and you go and you're exposed to people, then you aren't likely to either get it severely or get it at all.
Right.
Well, I mean, there's a third group to that. Yeah, because I mean, there's a third group to that, which is, and we saw this with the measles vaccine, right? There are those that get the vaccine, but for some reason it's not sufficient for their bodies, so they can still catch measles if it's in the wild. So I think that's the population you're concerned about, those that are unable to get it.
Right, and so that's very relevant for coronavirus because there are people out there which get vaccinated and the vaccine is not effective on their body for whatever reason, and that's where herd immunity really comes into play. Is because 2 people out of 1,000, the vaccine doesn't work for them. Or 2 people out of 1,000 didn't get vaccinated because they're, too young or too old or whatever, for any various reasons why the vaccine is contraindicated for a specific group of people. But when the other 998 people in that group of 1,000 has been vaccinated and it works, the likelihood that, you're one of 2 people in a giant group, the likelihood that the other person in that group has measles and can give it to you is very, very minuscule. But when the number of people in that group of 1,000 that's not vaccinated goes up and up and up and up and up because of anti-vaccine people and things like that, the higher the number of non-vaccinated people or the higher the number of people who've been vaccinated and it's just not effective, the higher that number gets, the less the herd immunity can keep you safe. So in reality, herd immunity is keeping the people safe who can't get vaccinated. But there's a minimum percentage of people that's needed to have herd immunity. And a scientific, this is not an anecdote, but it's a statistic that I heard several years ago. There are pneumococcal vaccines on the market now, relatively new type of vaccine over the past decade or two. The pneumococcal vaccines are mostly given to children, but what they saw after these vaccines started to be widely distributed was that the number of elderly people who died from these viruses was drastically dropping off. And that is an example of herd immunity because the kids are the most common carriers of the viruses. But when the kids are all vaccinated, the kids don't have the viruses. They don't give the viruses to the elderly people who are the ones who never got the vaccine because it didn't exist when they were young. But they're the ones that are the most at risk. And so herd immunity was saving elderly people from death, even without those specific people having to be vaccinated, as long as enough other people in the community are vaccinated. So, that's how herd immunity works, and that's why as many people need to be vaccinated as possible so that the ones that can't be, or the ones that the vaccine doesn't work for them, are still safe. And that's why when the number of...
Could Disney legally require their guests to be vaccinated, like schools?
No, I don't think so.
Why not? It's private property.
Well, they're not allowed to ask.
They're not allowed to ask, right? That's the problem. Whether it's private property or not, they're not allowed to ask. But see, this is where China has the one up on us, because Shanghai Disneyland is requiring health QR codes from everybody who visits, and the health QR code says either you've been vaccinated or you don't have the antibodies or you've been tested or whatever. I mean, those health QR codes store that information. So here's kind of maybe what we need is, it's illegal or Disney can't ask you, or I guess they could ask you, but you don't have to answer. It's illegal for them to ask you if you've been vaccinated. But if you had a health QR code that was issued by the government or whatever, and that health QR code, Disney could look up and determine whether you've been vaccinated or not. Disney doesn't have to ask you then. Right? The health QR code tells them. So if there was a health QR code that says, you've been vaccinated, and Disney says everyone who comes into the park needs to have a health QR code, well, there you go. That's a way for them to tell that without having to ask. The problem is that, that can be required in China because China is a communist state, and there's a whole bunch of people that are going to argue that that's not something that we want to have in America. But at the same time, so maybe they can't. Here's a question, and this is what I think. I don't remember whether I said this a couple weeks ago when we were talking about cruise lines. What if there's a vaccine and it's plentiful and everybody can have it and whatever? What if the cruise line says you can't board a cruise ship unless we administer a vaccine in the cruise terminal after you check in before you board the ship? They're not asking whether you're vaccinated or not. They're administering a vaccine to you in order to let you board, and if you refuse to get the vaccine, they can refuse you boarding. There's a question where, it's cruise ships' private property. They don't have to let you on for whatever reason, and they're not asking you any protected health information, even though, telling somebody whether you're vaccinated or not is kind of a goofy thing to be up in arms about. What if they said, well, here's a vaccine. You have to take this in order for you to be allowed on the cruise ship. That's one way sort of around the HIPAA laws. Well, I mean,
because it takes like 2 weeks to build the antibodies.
It depends on the vaccine, right? Yes, absolutely, and that's why the health QR code in China is designed to, accommodate that, because yes, it does take some amount of time for vaccines to become completely effective. It takes time for your body to build up the antibodies. So, but there are situations where knowing whether somebody's been vaccinated against coronavirus would be really handy to know. And, there's privacy laws in place, but at the same time, people want to be safe. People want to go on cruises. People want to go to Disney World. And
I have an idea.
You go to Disney World, you wear a magic band, Disney knows where you are. You're giving up quite a bit of privacy when you're in Disney World to begin with. So what's one more little bit of privacy in terms of have you been vaccinated?
That's true. And I also have an idea. So what if Disney said, either you can let us know that you've been vaccinated and show us proof that you've been vaccinated, or you take a rapid COVID test right now.
There you go. That's exactly. And so much better than a temperature check is a 5-minute COVID test that everyone will get when they enter the park. Just like we said, the X-ray machines at Universal are so much more effective than the bag checks at Disney. A rapid COVID test at the turnstiles is going to be so much more effective than temperature checks at finding the people who who have and may be an asymptomatic carrier of the coronavirus. Absolutely. So that's another thing where they're not asking you any health related questions, so it wouldn't be in direct violation of HIPAA laws, but you're giving up some kind of privacy by letting Disney administer a test and learning the results. But that's what you have to do in order to get into the park, because Disney can't afford to let you in the park if you're carrying the coronavirus.
So
there's a lot of people.
Do HIPAA laws cover, though? Do HIPAA laws cover like a public health threat disease, though?
I don't know. See, that's another question, right?
Yeah.
Because I know some, because if I have COVID and I know I have COVID and I go to Disney World and then several people get sick and die, I mean, wouldn't Disney have the right to refuse me entry? I mean, like I would think that something that is contagious and known to cause death would be exempt from a HIPAA law that states that you don't
Well,
need to, say that you have.
or-
that.
I don't think necessarily, but I think several HIPAA laws were suspended during the federal state of emergency declaration, weren't they? Why do I feel like I remember hearing
that HIPAA laws can be modified or suspended or whatever needs to happen.
Right.
If the government wants cruise ships to be able to cruise and the cruise ships say, look, we can't do this without some kind of testing or some sort of acknowledgement that the people have been vaccinated, HIPAA laws are not something that can't be changed to accommodate, the new reality after coronavirus. It certainly is possible that HIPAA laws, as they relate to coronavirus and coronavirus vaccines, can certainly be changed.
So you bring up an interesting point, Jason, because there is precedent for requiring vaccination, in certain instances, and that's with international travel. There are many countries that require a vaccination or a treatment plan before they'll let you enter the country based on the diseases that are happening in their area. So it's not too much of a stretch to say, especially with a cruise line, to say before you board a cruise, you have to show proof of this vaccination. And in that case, you would get around HIPAA laws because the person that had received the vaccination is volunteering that information. You're not necessarily asking them for their medical records. So there may be a possibility. I think it gets a little bit tougher with the parks here in the States because you can't restrict interstate travel. But there might be something that they could do in that regard to require vaccination before entry.
Yeah, Rich Grafton, who's been on this show in weeks past, is in the chat. He must be watching. He says HIPAA does have a provision around public health. It strikes a balance when public responsibility supports disclosure of some forms of data, for example, to protect public health. So I think certainly, if Disney needed to have HIPAA laws modified or have the public health provision ratified for them to reopen the parks, I think the government could certainly do something along those lines.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about it some weeks ago. I mean, even, talking back about the cruise ships, I mean, they make you sign a health waiver now that has you disclose certain medical information. They ask them
because if you're more than 24 weeks pregnant, they won't let you on. That's right.
Exactly. Yeah. They ask if you're pregnant. They ask, have you run a fever in the past? What is it, like 48 hours? If you've had any kind of stomach bug, if you've vomited, diarrhea, they do ask medical information before you cruise. So, I mean, it's not necessary. I mean, I know the chat, a lot of people are saying it would be an invasion of privacy and things, but there is precedent for it. So, especially if it comes down to opening or not opening and making the public safe, I think it's not outside the realm of possibility that the laws may change around places like Disney or any public place for that matter, stadiums, anything like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, like temperature checks, if temperature checks can be legal, right, and can be legally administered at the entrance to a park, then certainly a COVID test can be administered. So there's certain, like I said, there are certain health things that they can force you to do, and the cruise medical waiver is kind of the same thing, where I think that they're not asking you for specific health information. They're saying, I understand that if I'm more than 24 weeks pregnant, I am not permitted to go on the cruise, right? So they're just saying you have to sign this form to cruise, and you have to read it and sign it and agree to it, but they can't ask, are you pregnant? They can say, you have to sign this form to acknowledge that you're not pregnant in order to get on the boat. So I think there's a lot of ways around these laws, and I just want to acknowledge there's a lot of talk in the chat about, Disney World can't even regulate service animals. How are they going to regulate, things like HIPAA laws and health QR codes and things like that So, and how would a health QR code scan at the turnstiles when the magic bands don't scan 50% of the time? Somebody said, which I thought was really funny. Yeah. They can't even regulate electric scooters and people running over others in electric scooters,
that one's
right?
my favorite.
So I think there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of things that can be done. And I think, in order for the country to sort of get back to normal and fully reopen, a lot of these things like HIPAA laws are going to have to be looked at in a little bit more detail, and certain things may be delineated as a requirement for public health that is exempt from the HIPAA law, and maybe it's something having to do with coronavirus testing or vaccination or whatever. Here's another question that somebody put up, and this has to do with bag checks, and this is something that's absolutely relevant, especially when we talked about Disney bag checks being relatively ineffective versus the X-ray machines at Universal. You have these security guards that are going to rifle through your bag, and then they're going to rifle through the next person's bag and the next person's bag and the next person's bag, and they're touching all that stuff. And regardless of whether they have gloves on, gloves can harbor coronavirus just like bare hands. The gloves aren't there to protect your bag from getting contaminated with coronavirus. The gloves are there to protect the security guard's hands. So, are security guards going to sanitize their hands in between rifling through each person's bag? Because if not, that can spread coronavirus too, just like touching any other ride surface. If your purse has some coronavirus in it, a security guard could easily spread it to the next person's purse, even if they're standing 6 feet away, because the social distancing doesn't have anything to do with that, because it's surface contact. So yeah, maybe if nothing else good comes from this coronavirus, maybe it will finally get Disney to install X-ray machines and get rid of the bag checks that are not only a tremendous waste of time and slow down the entry, but they're also much less effective than X-ray machines. So hey, who knows? But those
it's a
bag
great
checks
time to do it if they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Sure. So that's a possibility too. I want to give other people, other of the panelists, a chance to say any more things, but we also want to take a short commercial break. So I'll let it up to you guys if there's anything else you want to say now, or you want to wait till we take a little commercial break and then come back and talk about this a bit more.
I just want to say one quick thing. I just hope that Disney can find some non-toxic ways to clean also, because can you imagine like them like bombing the entire Magic Kingdom every night, and then you're walking into like chemicals every day, like so many chemicals. I mean, chemicals can do just as many bad things to your health as well, if you're constantly breathing them in. So I hope that they're able to try some things that will alleviate the danger without always having to use like super harsh chemicals. That's like a totally different
I would hope
conversation.
so. And I would hope so. And they do exist. I used to work at a couple of daycares, and one of my girlfriends actually owns a daycare now, and she was so excited because she got, God forgive me, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but essentially it is an all-safe fogging machine that they can use to disinfect classrooms, disinfect toys, and basically it goes off like what you would think of like one of the flea bombs or something, but obviously it's not toxic or anything. It's safe to use around children, around babies. So products like that do exist. I hope that Disney is investing in those, especially to disinfect like the stores and things at night, places like that are closed quarters. It would be a great safe way to disinfect.
Yep. So quickly before we take a break, I just want to address a couple things that some people said in the chat. Someone said that Walt Disney World has been doing bag checks for years. Do you really think it spreads disease? Well, no, probably not. but it could spread coronavirus. And I was in the grocery store a couple weeks ago, and a woman had a big mask, and she had gloves on and everything, and she gets to the cash register, and she puts all of her groceries on the belt with the gloves on, and then it's time to pay, and then she roots through her purse to get out her wallet with the gloves still on. So those gloves protected her from touching anything with coronavirus, but then she went, and whatever happened to be on those gloves now is all over her wallet and the inside of her purse. And if there was coronavirus on that bottle of ketchup, it's now in her purse. And she's going to go home, and she's going to take the gloves off and think she's safe, and the coronavirus is going to be all over her wallet and her credit card. So, you know, I think the bag checks probably didn't spread disease, no. But in the age of coronavirus, I think they absolutely, certainly could spread coronavirus.
Plus, there's a better way to do it.
Difficult at all.
There's such a better way to do it. And we have it at Universal.
Yep, absolutely. And then other people said, with the number of bathrooms that Disney has, do you think they're going to be able to have enough toilet paper to keep them all stocked? Which I just thought was funny. Somebody else wrote, and this is a good point, if they pull a person out of line after a temperature check because their temperature is 101 or whatever, how do they keep that person safe? How do they keep themselves, the cast members, safe from that person? How do they keep the rest of the people in line safe from that person if they're pulling a person out of line because they have 102 temperature and assuming they have some kind of you know, communicable virus or whatever? They have to pretty much like instantaneously quarantine that person in a little phone booth or something, because otherwise they're putting everyone else in danger. I mean, obviously everyone else was in danger before they knew, but now they know. And now that Disney knows that person has a fever, they have to do something to protect themselves and the rest of the guests from that person who they are assuming has some kind of virus.
But what about the flip side of that too? Because what if you get pulled out for a check because something went wrong? Because again, I mean, the metal detectors there aren't always 100% accurate. I've set them off with Alex and Ani bracelets before by accident. Like, what happens if you get pulled out of line because the thermometer or something happened and you get cleared through a second screening and then go back into the park with everybody walking around thinking that you're contagious?
Yeah. I mean, there's all kinds of problems, I think, with these temperature checks. And honestly, you know, the thought that, you know, if the governments want to let the parks set their own rules, it may be the case that a temperature check brings more liability to the parks, because if you have been you know, checked for your temperature and let in, there's some assumption that you're safe, and there's also some assumption that the temperature checks are going to be accurate, and that if you have a temperature, that Disney is going to be you know what to do and know how to handle the situation with a person who has 102 temperature. You know what? It's almost like it's better for them not to know, simply because the information that they could get from a temperature check could be inaccurate and doesn't tell them anything anyway. So, you know, Bob Iger mentioned these temperature checks, but we may not see that happen when they reopen. Like, you know, people go to work and say they're getting their temperature checked at the start of every shift. That's fine. I mean, temperature checks are fine. They might catch something. They're better than nothing, but they're certainly not anywhere near enough to go by. And the fact that they can be wrong, and we don't know the accuracy rate of temperature checks, certainly depends on the device that's being used. It just means that, you know, it may not be worth the hassle. You might catch one person in 100,000 that otherwise wouldn't be caught by another way. So, you know, there's all that. So it's we're over an hour into the show right now. I want to take a quick commercial break and let anyone on the panel run and grab a beverage or whatever they need. I know I certainly need one. And we'll be back after these words. Stay tuned.
While you're enjoying the program you're listening to or watching right now, did you know that WDWNT.com has even more original programs you could be enjoying? Like...
Dreamfinders is WDW News Today's podcast all about the creative culture surrounding Disney parks. Curious what it's like to read poetry about the Haunted Mansion? Well, we've talked to someone who has. How about what it takes to actually build a Disney castle? We've chatted with a guy who did just that. Authors, Imagineers, dancers, actors, photographers, filmmakers, and a whole lot more have all stopped by to chat about how Disney has inspired their artistic work. Dreamfinders. Episodes drop every other Tuesday on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcatcher.
4 panelists, 30 minutes, 1 week in Disney Parks news. This is Parks Center. On Parks Center, the panel and I cover the top 7...
7?
Yeah, 7 Disney park stories of the past week. From attraction news to transportation scandals to new food and merchandise, we'll cover it all in 30 minutes or less. You can watch us stream live every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. at wdwntunes.com, watch episodes on demand at youtube.com/wdwnt, or subscribe to the audio version of the show on your favorite podcast app.
Ride Rehab is the podcast of ridiculously reskinning, refurbishing, and even removing Disney attractions, shows, areas, and parks. Can we cram Star Wars or Marvel into anything else? Just listen and find out. Visit riderehab.com to start listening now. That's riderehab.com.
WDWNT Nerd Alert is the podcast that encompasses all things Marvel and Star Wars in a fun and entertaining format. On each episode, we take a look at the latest news, provide reviews for the latest feature films, inform you about what is going on in the comic book world, and discuss and debate original topics pertaining to the worlds of Marvel, Star Wars, and beyond. Find us on various podcast applications by searching for WDWNT Nerd Alert.
The WDW News Today podcast is the one that started them all. Join us for comprehensive history segments, heated debates, epic countdowns, and more from the Disney theme parks around the globe. Just search for WDW News Today in whatever podcast service you choose.
Last but certainly not least is WDWNT's premiere show, WDW News Tonight. Join us every Thursday night at 9 p.m. for a live weekly audio and video show that combines the latest headlines, comedy, trending vacation topics, call-in games, and in-depth discussions to bring Disney fans a one-of-a-kind 2-hour program covering the Disney parks. If you can't catch the show live, you can always watch it later on YouTube or listen to it through your desired podcast service.
Get more info on all of these shows and more online at WDWNT.com, the worldwide leader in Disney parks news and entertainment.
Welcome back to Pressing Issues. I'm your host, Jason Diffendahl. We are here talking in-depth discussions about the reopening of Disney parks and what things are going to be like when they finally reopen, and maybe when they're going to reopen, and what's happening in Shanghai with Shanghai Disneyland reopening. So we've talked about all that in the first hour. I want to pivot now to something a bit more happy, but maybe not. So we've talked about social distancing guidelines. We've talked about temperature checks at the entrance of the parks and all these things that may be in place when the parks reopen. So here's something to think about. If the parks reopen at 25% capacity, maybe you think that means, oh, well, the lines are going to be short, there's not going to be many people in there. Well, the flip side of that argument is that there's not going to be daytime parades. There's not going to be, well, there hasn't been nighttime parades in forever, so forget that. There's not going to be nighttime fireworks shows. And this is all, we discussed a lot of this last week on Pressing Issues last week with the I forget the name of the project. Some circuit something or other. It was goofy. Secure Circuit initiative or something like that. There may not be any theater shows where you have to sit and be near each other for an extended period of time, and so all this is the case. Maybe you think, hey, that'd be great to visit when there's not that many people in the parks, but if there's not that much to do in the parks when you do visit, that means although there's fewer people, they're also doing fewer things, so maybe the lines are going to be just as long. And if you're there at 50% capacity or whatever, and you don't get to see fireworks, you don't get to see parades, you don't get to see castle stage shows, but you paid the same price for the ticket as you did when you went last year in the fall and got to see all those things. What is a day at a Disney park worth in terms of money, and how much it's going to cost? And we talked about whether Disney can even afford to open at 25 or 50% capacity because of the cost to run the parks and the reduced tickets, reduced income from tickets being sold. The same thing goes, well, maybe they're going to have to charge more to reopen the parks to accommodate 500,000 hand sanitizer stations all over the place, or gloves for all the security bag check guys who are rifling through your stuff or whatever. We've already seen Disney increasing prices at certain restaurants while they've been closed. That happened a couple weeks ago. So the question that I want to talk about in the show now is, when the parks do reopen, say they're at 50% capacity or whatever, is the fact that the parks are just open, is that make people excited enough and happy enough that you're going to go? Even if there's no fireworks, there's no parades, there's no castle shows. If the ticket prices rise, are you going to be willing to pay more for your tickets to go, especially with less being offered? All of those things, I think, factor into the value proposition of a trip to Walt Disney World. And I know the value of a Disney vacation had come into question a lot in the past couple of years as ticket prices continued to rise, and things got cut. As I said, there's no more nighttime parades anymore, at least not in this hemisphere. We have now with fewer offerings, maybe there's not any character meals anymore. I know that a lot of people, I remember going as a kid, and character meals were certainly something I would look forward to. Are people going to be willing to spend thousands and thousands of dollars to take their families to Walt Disney World and not get the experiences that they are looking for or looking forward to or had expected because of new procedures and precautions in place due to coronavirus? Would you pay whatever it is, $40-some for breakfast at Chef Mickey's without Chef Mickey? Would you pay $50-some or $60 or whatever it is for a meal at Cinderella's Royal Table if you don't actually get to meet Cinderella? So the question is, what is the valuable, what's worth the money at Walt Disney World, what's not, and how are the changes that are going to be in place when the parks reopen play into that value proposition? And obviously the value proposition is different for different people. It's certainly different for annual pass holders than it is for people who are going there for a week, for, once every 5 or 10 years or whatever. But it's I think something we talked a little bit about last week, and I wanted to continue the discussion, especially since we have Marcy and Ashley back on here. And I know Marcy is one of her favorite topics to talk about is prices at Walt Disney World. So,
oh my goodness, I have a reputation, I guess.
You do. You're not even on any show that often, and you still have a reputation.
That's sad. So, okay, so I've been thinking about this, and as a Disney fan, I would love to be there as soon as Disney opens, because this is it's an unprecedented time in history. You know, this is a historical time to be at the parks when they reopen, to see 25 to 50% capacity, to see what Disney's doing to keep people safe. Just to experience that would be really very interesting, and as a Disney fan, I would love to see that.
So
as far as
let
the
me
value
interrupt you
goes,
just real quick, Marcy.
Go ahead.
Because I totally agree with what you're saying. It is an absolutely historical time, and what happens when Disney reopens is going to be something that everybody's interested. The same applies, in my mind at least, the same applies when there's a hurricane barreling down on Florida. You know, being in Florida while there's a hurricane and Disney shutting down due to a hurricane and stuff is something I think would be really interesting to see too. But you know, a lot of people, especially the last time when Tom went and stayed at Yacht Club in order to report on the hurricane, a lot of people complained that he was, you know, taking advantage of the situation and should be staying home and not going to Disney World and this and that. So I want to address that as well when we're talking about this, because I think it's relevant. So you don't have to talk about it right now, but I just wanted to bring that up after what you had just said, because it just hit me that it's just like a hurricane.
Well, yeah, and that kind of plays into what I was going to say. As a Disney fan, I would want to do it just because when you're a huge fan of Walt Disney World and Disney in general, and you've been going to the park since you were young, and you have all these amazing memories. I mean, to go when something monumental happens is just it's really cool to be able to say, okay, yes, I was there and I experienced that with everybody else. As far as where I am specifically in my life, where, you know, I have a husband, I have kids, we are in New York, you know, we don't live in Florida, we don't have annual passes at the moment. To think about spending what it would cost to go down there, and then to have to figure out, you know, what we're going to do with our dogs and where we're going to stay, and is it going to be safe. So let's just take out the coronavirus factor completely. Say if Disney had to open for some other reason, and it was 25% capacity, and there were no fireworks, and there was no parades, and any indoor shows were canceled, and, you know, you could only do certain things. Would I pay the amount of money that it costs now to still go and do that? I would not. I feel like, I honestly, even before this all happened, I felt a lot that Disney was putting out were just like money hungry, you know, just greedy, basically just grabbing at money for the sake of grabbing at money. You know, they want to get your money. You know, some of the things were really valuable. Some things I would love to do. There were certain experiences, but then you've got cabanas in Tomorrowland. It's like, really, you know, like some things you're like, sometimes it's just like, it is so ridiculously obvious that all you want to do is get into my pocket.
Or taking
so anyway,
away the free bread. Marcy, you haven't been on a show since they took away the free bread, have you?
Well, I actually went off about the free bread, and then they brought back the bread, and I was okay.
Yep.
But yeah, so anyway, so then on top of that, you add coronavirus to that. So now not only are you not getting what you were paying for before, now you have this added stress of, am I going to get sick? Are my kids going to get sick? Is my husband going to get sick? Are we going to and if we do get sick, are we going to be stuck here in Florida? Are we going to be able to go home? When we go home, are we going to have to quarantine for 14 days? It's a whole nother level of stress. So I don't think that for me and for my family, it would be feasible to go until this is much more under control than it is right now. As far as the value proposition goes, I can go, honestly, when I think about going to the parks, a lot of my favorite memories don't have anything to do with going on rides. It has to do with being with family, the feeling you get when you're walking down Main Street, with the smells, the sights, and all these things. If you have a mask on and gloves on and people are sanitizing all over the place, that experience is going to be tainted for me. I mean, the escapism is completely gone at that point, and then you're also constantly worried about if you're going to be getting sick. So I don't think the value is there just for me.
Yeah, it's a very good point that you mentioned, and I want to sort of make that clear that the whole goal of this discussion was to sort of ignore the fact that there's the risk of catching coronavirus and however big that risk is. I'm just talking about monetary value. So yeah, certainly adding this whole coronavirus headache on top of things, and whether it's scary or not is still something else to deal with. But even without that, even if you were vaccinated, right? Like, so you're vaccinated, you were the first person in the world to get the vaccine, you can now go to Disney World and not worry about catching the coronavirus, but you still don't get fireworks, you don't get shows, and those sorts of things. So yeah, is it worth it?
Yeah, as a fan, if I was single, if I lived in Florida, if I had an annual pass, absolutely, I would be there. But I have a family. I don't have an annual pass. I live, a 24-hour drive. I'm not getting on a plane anytime soon. So like, am I gonna, spending $6,000-$7,000 on going down there for 25% of an experience? You're in the park with 25% of the people. It's 25% of the experience as well. Like, is that worth it? To me, no.
But Marcy, plane flights are really cheap right now. You should just get on a plane.
And you get coronavirus free with every flight.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the planes are not that much better than a cruise ship in terms of, a petri dish.
I think it's actually worse. Because it's like recycled air and all that on an airplane.
Well, I think the air filtration is better on an airplane, though. I think they do. I think most planes do a really good job at.
But at least on a cruise ship, you have you have
to go outside,
you can get fresh air. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So I don't know.
I agree.
I'm of two minds of it. Really, I think a lot of it will depend on. I think we've all kind of come to the sort of realization that obviously fireworks, Phantasmic, things like that are going to be a no-go when they first reopen. Probably theater shows, so things like the Frozen sing-along, It's Tough to Be a Bug, Monsters Laugh For, those are probably going to, those are, I think, a maybe, since we've heard about them testing, seating in those theaters, and those are slightly easier to control than everybody just crowding around for fireworks on Main Street. But I think it's going to be, it's going to be a question of how much do they actually catch? Because, and my sister and I were talking about the other night, it's like there's this one part of me that I just want to go sit on Main Street and stare at the castle. I don't care. I don't care if I have to wear a mask. I don't care if I have to wear gloves. I just want to sit on Main Street. I want to hear the music. I want to see the Dapper Dans. I don't want to stare at the castle. That's all I want. I just want to go back to my happy place. But if they've cut so much that you can't do that, like if we're talking only e-tickets are open, or maybe e-tickets and a handful of other attractions, almost like a party night, and maybe even a little bit more restricted than that, I don't think the value is there. And I would question, it would be hard. I'd still want to go, but I don't think the money's there. If most of the attractions are open, if most things, apart from fireworks or theater shows, are open, and again, I'm in a different place than Marcy, because while I am married, we don't have children yet. And so, I really only have to worry about me and my husband, and we're both relatively young and healthy. So it is a different proposition than somebody with children. If I had kids, I probably would say absolutely not until I would feel more comfortable about them being safe. But me personally, I would probably say, yeah, it's still a value. And we also don't know, like they may discount rooms and everything like they did after 9/11. And I think that shifts the balance of the value proposition, because if I can get 30% or 40% off a room, that makes it far more enticing, especially for someone like me. I do suspect, though, that when they open, we're probably going to see a lot of like childless millennials. You know, that whole post went viral, and people, I think, kind of more like me that don't have, you know, a big family. I don't think we're going to see a lot of kids at Disney World, which is also going to be very, very weird. I don't see a lot of kids initially because parents are going to be afraid.
Point about kids. Well, parents are going to be afraid, and somebody wrote in the chat a little while ago, you know, adults can understand social distancing and can understand the guidelines and hand sanitizer requirements and this and that. You know, you have a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5-year-old kid who just wants to go and see the characters. They're not going to understand any of those things. So not only are you going to have, you're going to have all these restricted offerings or things that have been cut completely, but then you're going to have kids that all they want to do is go visit the characters, and they can't, and they're not going to understand how.
I don't think the characters.
How can they be at Disney World and not be allowed to go, hug Mickey? So yeah, I think my guess is there are going to be a lot fewer kids than you otherwise would see, simply because not only is there the coronavirus danger. That people naturally aren't going to want their kids to catch the coronavirus, but it's also going to be a much more difficult place to take a kid when they can't do things that kids want to do when they go to Disney World.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and somebody in the chat really even too had pointed out that pediatricians are saying that kids shouldn't wear masks for long periods of time for the worry of CO2 poisoning. So, I mean, again, the proposition of taking your kids to Disney is a whole host of problems, and it's going to be a weird sight, but I don't think we're going to see many kids skipping down Main Street for a very long time.
Yeah, the other thing that you said about, you just want to go back to your happy place and sit on Main Street and look at the castle. I tend to agree to a large extent. I mean, I've gone to Disney World on trips recently where I've been there for 5 days. And I went on 4 attractions over the course of 5 days. Mm-hmm. One of those days was when Festival of the Arts opened, and so we spent the whole day eating food and didn't go on any attractions. But I mean, I totally agree that I can go to Disney World and be very happy and not go on many, if any, attractions at all. And like Marcy said, the memories of standing on Main Street and looking at the castle and watching the fireworks. I mean, some of my favorite memories from childhood are watching the Main Street Electrical Parade and Spectrum Magic, and now those are gone, although that has nothing to do with coronavirus. But now with the fireworks, right? So that has to do with Chapek being cheap. Illuminations is gone. That's another one of my memories. Illuminations is gone, and that has nothing to do with coronavirus. Mm-hmm. So a lot of these things I had to deal with before coronavirus, but now there's not going to be fireworks anywhere. And you're not going to be able to watch Fantasmic. And not that I wanted to watch Rivers of Light, but heck, at this point, I'd take it. So, yeah, a lot of these, I can certainly go and have a great time at Walt Disney World and not go on any attractions. But the question is, with all these other things not being available that I would spend my time doing, like fireworks and parades and things, is there any value in me going? And so here's, the position that I'm coming from. I've been there in January, and we had planned a trip to Tokyo for the beginning of April. And when the Tokyo trip got canceled, we thought about going to Disney World instead, and then they closed, and that wasn't going to happen. So we canceled our Tokyo trip before Disney even closed, just because we knew Japan was in a different situation. It was much earlier than for the U.S. So then we said, well, hey, let's go for the beginning of Flower and Garden, and since we're not going to Tokyo, and then that got canceled. And then we had moved a trip. We had booked a trip for next week, actually, and that's canceled. And now we have a trip scheduled for the middle of June, and we have tickets for Villains After Hours and H2O Glow Nights, two things that I've never done because I've never gone in the summer to do them. And so it's like, you know, I have these trips booked. I keep wanting to go. I would love to go. I would love to have them reopen. But at the same time, yeah, I have 2 kids at home. I mean, I'm making these trip plans with my sister, and I'm not taking the kids. You know, my youngest kid has asthma. That's a huge risk factor for coronavirus too. So, you know, I really want to go. I'd love to go. I'm gonna have to quarantine when I get back to make sure that I don't have coronavirus and give it to my daughter. You know, but that's kind of sometimes what a crazy Disney fan has to do. But you know, plus we had flight credits and all that to use, so it's kind of like, you know, but yeah, I mean, hotels are cheap. Somebody in the chat said Villains After Hours is canceled through July, and I don't think that's the case. I think only July 6th was canceled because I literally bought my tickets yesterday for the middle of June. But anyway, yeah, I mean, there's all these things, and certainly Villains After Hours and H2O Glow Nights could get canceled, that's for sure. I mean, those very expensive, hard-ticketed events have been lightly attended in the past year before coronavirus, so it wouldn't surprise me if they get canceled, not necessarily for any reasons having to do with coronavirus, but just because only 200 people actually paid money to buy tickets, and that's a huge loss of money for Disney to have to run an event when only 200 people bought tickets. But you know, so there's all kinds of issues, and I could certainly go and have a good time, but I feel bad for the people that are, you know, that are going for the first time in 5 or 10 years, or their first trip with their kids, and you know, their kids are all looking forward to you know, visiting the characters or getting autographs or whatever. I mean, you know, when I was a kid, I thought autographs were dumb, but you know, there's kids that love autographs, and the characters aren't going to be signing autographs anymore.
Argument's sake, though, I think, at least initially when they reopen, a lot of those people, because, I mean, for better or worse, the Disney parks have gotten more mainstream press in the past 6 months than they probably have in the past year, 2 years, as far as just daily operations and things. So I would think that logically, if you are one of those people that hasn't been in 5 or 10 years, or this is your first time ever going, you're probably watching those news reports just as closely, if not closer, than we are. Because you're going to, you know, again, we don't care if I ride Flight of Passage. I don't care if I see a parade. I don't care if I see fireworks. But they do care. So I won't be surprised if you see a lot of those people push out their trip and wait for Disney to get back to normal operations, versus trying to go and brave it, you know, now or even 6 months down the road when everything's not open. I think you'll see a lot of those people cancel or reschedule for when it's open and like fully open, versus trying to do it now. At least I would hope so. I would really hope so, for their sake, that they wait and experience it the way it should be experienced for the first time.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm thinking in particular, like, what if you have a trip planned for maybe July or August, you know, a family trip that you planned since last year. You know, those are the people that I think are in a quandary, because you don't know how much is going to be open in July and August. It might be a lot of hassle, or it may be even expense to rebook that trip now, because obviously, you know, there's limits on how far out you can change reservations without a penalty and this and that. So maybe it's hard to change your reservations or whatever. But then you're faced with actually going in July, and you're like, I don't want to go in July. So then you want to decide, or maybe you can manage to cancel, but then your kids have been looking forward to it since you told them last year that you're going, and then it's like, wow, you know, it's such a disappointment, and there's all kinds of variables that come into play, and you know, I have a trip planned, so we planned a trip to Tokyo in November, and I'm worried about that one. I mean, I was really upset when I had to cancel the April trip. I'm hoping things are back to normal by November, but right now, if you go to Japan from the United States, you have to quarantine for 14 days before you can do anything in Japan. So maybe Tokyo Disneyland will be reopened, but I can't go. That would almost be worse. I mean, it's like, hey, it's open, but I can't even go. Maybe I'll have to just take my work laptop and go quarantine in a hotel for 14 days and work from Japan just so that I can go. I mean, the length that some crazy Disney fans will go to, that's not out of the question. But I think too, there's people in the chat saying that their hotels are regular price and haven't been discounted and this and that. I think, and airfare too. I think a lot of what may be happening in that regard is that Disney's not. Not going to start discounting things until they know they're open. I mean, it doesn't make sense for Disney to put hotels on sale for June 1st if they're not sure that they're going to open on June 1st. So my thought is that they're going to not put things on sale until they know what kinds of crowds they can handle and know how many hotels are going to be open, because part of the secure circuit protocol had only the Magic Kingdom resorts open. So if the parks are at 25% capacity, well, the hotels are at 25% capacity too. That means everybody can fit in the 4 hotels near the Magic Kingdom or whatnot. So it's there's all kinds of questions, and I don't know that you're going to see deals until things start to reopen and people start to take. Wow, New York Badness just gave us a super chat of $100, and I would like to totally thank New York Badness.
Thank you
for that.
Are you sure you sent it to the right people?
Hopefully you did. Hopefully you meant to send it to us. Thank you very much. Wow, that almost made me lose my total train of thought. But if the parks are at 25% capacity and the hotels are only 5 hotels are open, but they're all full, then no, you're not going to see hotel discounts. And maybe airfare is not going to be cheap because Southwest is only running 25% of their planes. But as things start to ramp up and they start to bring more capacity online, and unless the bookings follow, then they're going to have to make some kind of discounts.
I mean, they're going to go
see discounts. I just don't think you will yet. Yeah, they're going to go slowly, but I think discounts and deals will be there. I think it's too early for them to be coming already, because we don't know anything that's going to happen when anything is going to be reopened. So.
Right, because discounts are going to follow availability, not the other way around, right? They're going to wait until the availability is there and it's not selling, then they'll discount, and then we'll start seeing, which I agree with you. I think we are going to get to the point where there are discounts, because I think there is enough nervousness in the general public about going to a large-scale theme park that I think the initial day or two, there will be a bunch of the typical locals and bloggers, but then, in a couple of weeks, I'm not sure their crowd levels are even going to match what their capacity is once they hit the 50, 75% capacity levels.
Yep, for sure. And I think, cruises are the same way. Like, we had planned to take a cruise in August and never booked it. And I've been looking at cruise fares, and they're not discounted either, because the cruises have no idea when they're going to start sailing again. But the ships are there, and the ships have crews, and the crews have to get paid. So I think even more so than a place like a theme park, I think the cruise ships are going to want to get back to full capacity as quickly as possible, because they have all these crew members on board. But they're not. You don't see discounts on cruises yet either, simply because they don't know when they're going to be able to reopen for regular business. So, but I think they're coming. I think we'll wait and see. But my guess is that the discounts are going to come. I think discounts are going to come from all kinds of places. I mean, even right now, like, I'm getting emails for, restaurants that are open and doing takeout only, but their business is down so much, they're giving, like, free $20 gift card if you buy a $50 gift card or whatnot. So there's businesses that are even open right now, and they're discounting heavily because the business is so weak compared to what it was. So I think it's just a matter of time till we see the same for hotels and airfare and things.
Yeah, I wonder, thinking about, opening a park with reduced capacity, Marcy brought it up earlier that there is some point at which it doesn't make sense for Disney to open the park at all until they hit a certain level of capacity. But I wonder if the answer is to use, I hate to say it, but use the after hours model, of doing like 3-hour blocks of 3,000 people in the Magic Kingdom with a very specific set of attractions that are open, none of your other entertainment. I almost wonder if people would be willing to pay for that, knowing that they're walking into, yes, it's reduced in terms of offerings, but it's also, it could be a really good experience for those attractions that are open.
Well, I mean, if you think about, 25 or 50% capacity with no fireworks and no stage shows, that almost is. I mean, a lot of the attraction, a lot of the value for something like Villains After Hours, or I did Early Morning Magic a year and a half ago, and I said it was the best $100 I spent. It was so nice to be in a park that wasn't crowded and got plenty of stuff done to make it worth the while. Plus, you got a free breakfast. I think it may almost be the case that opening at 25 or 50% capacity is exactly like that. You're going to have, and this is kind of what I hope for, you're going to have the very short waits for attractions and things like that, because there's just not going to be enough people there. The question is, can Disney actually make money? Because, it's not clear to me, especially seeing like Early Morning Magic and some of the earlier after hours, it's not clear to me that they actually made any money on those things. I mean, the prices keep going up, which either means they weren't making money and they needed to cover their costs, or there were too many people going and they needed to raise the prices to reduce because the capacity wasn't there. But in this scenario where a park opens at 25 or 50% capacity, the capacity's there, and you have people coming in that already paid tickets, and if you bought a one-day ticket at $120, well, you're nuts, but that's how much you paid. That's the same price as an after-hours event, but you get the park for the whole day. So I think a lot of this depends on the crowd levels, and here's a big question in my mind, is that when they say, okay, the Magic Kingdom can open at 50% capacity, well, the capacity of the Magic Kingdom is not a number that's fixed. I think a lot of people don't realize this, is that, if the Magic Kingdom has all of its rides and attractions open, the capacity can be X. But if Splash Mountain is closed for refurbishment, then the capacity of the Magic Kingdom is less than X. And I mean, that has to do with fire codes and things like that. But if an attraction is not open, the capacity is less of the entire park, right? Because 300 people can be in line for Splash Mountain, but if Splash Mountain is closed, that's 300 people that can't be accommodated. So the capacity is 300 less than it would be otherwise. And so, you have Magic Kingdom capacity as a specific number when everything is open and operational. But if there's no stage shows, there's no parades, there's no fireworks, there's no theater shows, the capacity of the Magic Kingdom is very different. And, when they say 50% capacity, do they mean the 50% of that capacity or the 50% of the original capacity, what I would say is the maximum capacity for the Magic Kingdom, the number they use at Christmas when they have to do phased closings because the park is at capacity, right? Everything is open and operational on Christmas Day, so that's the maximum.
They just can't hold any more
is it
people.
50%?
Yeah.
Is it 50% of Christmas Day capacity, or is it 50% of the actual capacity number that would be calculated with half of the attractions running? So, that 50% number could vary quite a bit depending on, what you're taking 50% of. And so, a 50% capacity Magic Kingdom with 50% of the attractions open is still 100%, right? It's 100% capacity of everything that's open.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I would have
maybe
to
the lines will be shorter,
imagine-
but maybe not.
Maybe.
I'm not
Although,
convinced
with
that
all
they
that they're
would be shorter
saying,
anyway.
I don't know. I would have to believe that if you're going to achieve what they want to achieve, which is having people be able to spread out in queues and not bunch together, that you would almost have to take 50% of the theoretical capacity with those things closed. Because otherwise, to your point, then you're solving nothing. People are still going to be shut because you can't spread people out in the queue if theoretically the queue is going to be full because you're going to be at 100% capacity. Because then you're just going to have a bunch of queues spilling out and you can't crowd control in the queues properly anymore because it'll be like Slinky Dog everywhere where there are lines going back to the beginning of the park to get on an attraction.
Because 50% of Christmas Day is basically a typical day in January in the early 2000s.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And with if you have to be 6 feet away from everyone in the queue, that you're right, Ashley. That means that there's going to be so many more people not in queues that are going to be jamming up the walkways. You're not going to be able to maintain a 6-foot social distance in the walkway. Because there's going to be too many people.
Unless they're going to take 50% of what that theoretical capacity is, eliminating things that hold people like theater shows and parades and all of that, which I'm sure they're calculating the math on that now, because either way, they're going to want to know the stats and the numbers.
Right. And I mean, some attractions are going to, some attractions are going to have to be only every other ride vehicle or whatever to maintain a 6-foot distance. But then you have something like Tomorrowland Speedway. Well, that's sort of like a natural 6-foot. You can't physically be closer than 6 feet to somebody else in the car in front of you. So that attraction could operate at 100% capacity. So it's different for each attraction too. Splash Mountain, 6-foot distance means you can only put maybe 4 people in one ride vehicle instead of 10. I think it's going to be different for each attraction, and I think Disney has to figure that out. I don't know whether they figured that out yet or not. Buses. How are buses? We already talked about last week. The monorail's not going to be operational. So how are you going to get from the Magic Kingdom to the Grand Floridian if not on the monorail? And they're not done the walkway yet. It's going to have to be on a bus, and you're going to have to maintain social distancing in buses. But again, with surfaces and touching and handrails, buses are going to be a huge potential infection area as well. Skyliner is the same thing. I don't know whether the Skyliner is going to operate. If the Skyliner doesn't operate, who's going to stay at Riviera? That's like, there's no point to stay at Riviera if you can't ride the Skyliner to the parks. It's almost like the Magic Kingdom resorts. There's no point in paying way more money than they're worth if the monorail's not running, and maybe that's why they said the Magic Kingdom resorts are the only ones going to be open, because then they can afford to charge that money regardless of whether the monorail's running or not. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling at this point. We're also kind of at the 2-hour mark, so I'm certainly willing to keep going, especially if you guys have a lot you want to talk about. So
let me just throw out one hypothetical, and I'd like to hear your 3 opinion of whether you would do this. What if they set up basically time slots for each of the parks? So, you'll pay the same amount of money for a ticket at Magic Kingdom, but you're only allowed access for, let's say, a 3 or 4 hour block. So they achieved their 25% capacity by basically taking the full day crowd and breaking it into 4 segments. So you would still have your typical capacity for the day that you would go, other than, parades and fireworks, maybe theaters, or theaters might be a reduced capacity, but regardless, you're split up. After 3 hours you could go to your next park, you could go over to Epcot, and you're again having 25% of the people go scheduled for that period. Would you still pay for park tickets in a scenario like that?
I mean, that's basically like what you said when you said to use this as an after hours model. Although I think the number of people at an after-hours event is less than 25% of a full park. But, I mean, this is a great question as far as value proposition goes, because, okay, if I go on a typical day in the summer, maybe I can get 10 attractions done the whole day. What if I can get 10 attractions done in 3 hours? You know, I'm getting the same value out of that day, but I'm actually spending a lot less time doing it. So I think that's a perfect question, a perfect example when you talk about what is the value of a visit to Walt Disney World. Because like Ashley said, if all she wants to do is go sit on a park bench and people watch, then your $100 for 3 hours is not any good compared to $100 for a whole day, because you can people watch for a whole day. But if your value in a Disney park visit is getting attractions done, then yeah, it would be so much nicer to spend the same amount of money and go on all the attractions, but do it in 3 hours, and then you can go back to your hotel and swim in the pool or whatnot, which is something I love doing, but rarely do because I'm in the parks often. So often during a trip, I don't, maybe I get to the pool once during a week that I'm there. So to me, yeah, that's kind of a valuable thing. But the question, so the question is, how do they do that? How do they do that with fast passes? If there's that few people in the park, then maybe they get rid of fast passes. Wouldn't that be crazy? If a park was at 25% capacity, there'd be no need for fast passes, because the longest wait time for any attraction would probably be like half an hour. And that's for like Seven Dwarfs Mine Train or something. I mean, heck, you wait for 15 minutes. You wait for 15 minutes to get your fast pass scanned and get in the line sometimes because it's so crazy. But
that's assuming that they're running. Yeah, that's assuming that they're running each attraction to its full capacity, though. I mean, with a bare bones crew, which is probably what they're going to have, they're probably going to be running all the attractions at like half capacity. They're not going to be running both sides of Space Mountain. They're not going to be running all the boats and Pirates. They're not going to be running all the boats at Jungle Cruise. So even if they were, they'd have to spend time in between to sanitize the handrails on the boats or whatever, and the lap bars on Space Mountain. So yeah, I think there's no way that the operational capacity of any attraction is going to be the same. Even, for example, Tomorrowland Speedway, where they can still fill every car, if there's going to be a delay because they have to sanitize the steering wheels, there's going to be lower capacity overall. So I think that's going to happen to some extent in all cases. Yeah. So I mean, the thought that you're going to a park with 25% capacity, that doesn't necessarily mean you're getting more done. I mean, you could potentially be getting less done.
True. And if one of the things you wanted to get done was fireworks or a parade, you're not getting that done. So yeah, all those things play into the value question for sure.
Yeah. I think to circle back and answer Dave's question, like, would it be worth it to basically have because the way I'm picturing it, it would almost be like a park hopper, but you would have like a timer set for each park. And while that seems like a good idea logistically, I just don't see how it would work, because then you have to factor in travel time and everything, and having so many people essentially moving around from park to park at those almost specific times seems almost a logistical nightmare than just having a general park hopper. Now, what would be interesting to me and would be of value to me is if I could pay, say, even like $75 and say, okay, you can come to Magic, or you can pick a park and go to this park from park open, so like 8 a.m., 9 a.m., and you can stay until 1 o'clock. Or you can come at 2 o'clock and stay till park close. And then you spend either the morning or the afternoon at your resort or doing something else, Disney Springs, sleeping in, what have you. That to me would almost be more attractive than having a set timer on a park hopper. but having it at a discounted rate, because obviously, to Marcy's point, there's a lot of factors. You don't know what you're going to get when you get to the parks. So, you know, having a little bit of a cheaper ticket makes it more valuable to me if I'm going to have to cut my time at the park.
Yeah, I think the other thing, David, that your idea might have difficulty with, you know, they set up windows for Galaxy's Edge when that land first opened, and I think they were pretty effective at enforcing those time limits and getting people out of that section of the park, but that would be a much bigger headache to have to do that for an entire park.
I mean, yeah, you think about having
logistically, I think you'd have problems logistically. I mean, look at the people that, you know, how easy is it to get people out of the Magic Kingdom when there's an extra Magic Hours evening? You know, I mean, they can you know, ask to see your wristband or whatnot, or scan your Magic Band, and you can't go on a ride if you don't have an you know, resort reservation on your Magic Band. But they don't actually you know, go around and sweep the park and get everyone to leave. Like, it's just not that easy. So how
it would be
you know,
tough.
how they would actually do that, it would be pretty difficult. Yeah. I mean, maybe with Magic Bands they can track everybody and they can like send you push messages on My Disney Experience that says get out.
Or they could just like electroshock your wrist every 5 minutes that you're in the park over your time limit. Zap.
Well, if nothing else, they could start making everybody go through the Fast Pass queue and just not letting you on any attractions.
Right, but you could still be in the park. That's the thing. Is if there's
you could still be in the park
number,
theoretically.
Right, there's a capacity number, and you're still there. You're cutting into that maximum capacity, and whereas like for extra Magic Hours, well, you could still be there. You can't do anything, but you can still be there. But now when there's a fixed capacity or a lowered capacity and you're there, even though you're not allowed to go on any attractions, you're still there. And that's taking, you know, cut out of the capacity. So. The other thing I wanted to mention, and we could talk about this more next week, is that now I have to think about what I was going to say, because it just totally slipped my mind. One of the things that they talked about in Florida in the phased reopenings is that in phase 1 or whatever phase, when Disney first opens, it would only be Florida residents that were allowed in. So here's my question: I have a resort hotel booked for June 6th, but I'm not a Florida resident. Am I going to be allowed to go? I mean, I have a hotel reservation. So how are they going to enforce this Florida residents only thing when they first reopen if they're opening hotel bookings to all these people? I don't know.
I mean, I would have to imagine if that truly becomes a requirement, then your reservation would be canceled.
I guess it would.
And they may not open the resorts then right away. They may keep the resorts closed because, in theory, Florida residents wouldn't necessarily need a hotel room.
Well, yeah. So right. So what's the point of opening all the Magic Kingdom area resorts in phase 1 or whatever phase it is, if no one's going to stay there because the only people that are going are locals? I mean, obviously, if you're going from, you know, maybe you're coming from Southern Florida or the Panhandle or something and you need to stay overnight. But I think a lot of the people that are going, especially at the very beginning, as we talked about, are going to be Florida residents, and they're probably going to be locals. They're not going to need a hotel, or they're going to stay off property, or who knows what. So there's all kinds of issues with, I think, that, and you know, that was part of the phased opening plan, but we said last week, and it's worth saying here again, all these things that we're discussing, maybe they're the plans, maybe Disney's thinking about them, maybe they're not, maybe they're going to change their mind, probably they're going to change their mind before things actually reopen. And so who knows how much of this is actually going to take place, whether or not they're talking about it now or not. That's all this is sort of remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think if they wanted to limit who was the first group to come in, I think what they could potentially do is send an email out to the annual pass holders that are also Florida residents and just say, we're going to do like a test opening. If you would like to try it, you can sign up here and do it that way. And just not even.
Yeah, because Disney sign-up forms always work. We all know how.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean,
it'll be interesting tomorrow morning when we see May the 4th merchandise. They're supposed to have some kind of new system in place at Shop Disney.
We didn't even get to talk about that yet.
That was last week's discussion, and I think we're going to have another one of those next week, depending on how things go tomorrow. I couldn't even get the masks.
It was so annoying.
Yeah. So we'll see. But yeah, as people said in the chat earlier, they can't even get the Magic Band to work half the time. How are they going to do temperature scans? Well, how are they going to do these signups? When every other type of internet sign-up sale thing they do doesn't work. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that sort of thing. I do though think, it may be the case that if they want to reopen, whenever they open an attraction, they have cast member previews. Maybe they're going to have cast member previews for Walt Disney World reopening, because obviously there's so many cast members, they're not all going to get called back to work the minute they reopen. So you're going to have a ton of furloughed cast members. Maybe they'll just say, hey, you're a cast member. If you want to come visit, please come, because we're sort of testing things out. Wouldn't that be an interesting way to test out reopening, rather than annual pass holders who are maybe some of the most vocal, and there's certainly a fair number of them that are very entitled. Crazy. Thinking, I don't know that that's the group of people you'd want to invite. But cast members, you could invite to come back to do like a test reopening, or let them in for free, or give them a free meal. Say, hey, if you come, we're giving out free food at Pecos Bill's, or the the number one counter service restaurant in all of Walt Disney World, Cosmic Ray Starlight Cafe. Maybe cast members who are furloughed would come and help with that kind of test. I could see that happening. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities, I think, that could happen. And I think Josh D'Amaro is a pretty smart guy. I think he'll probably figure some things out. I hope a lot of his better ideas don't get overruled from higher up. We still don't know who the president of Parks and Resorts is. That's a position that's open. I keep calling in and asking if they need somebody to fill it, because I would volunteer. But as far as I know, the president of Parks and Resorts is still an open position. And so I don't know how much might get overruled or not, but I think Josh D'Amaro is a great guy. I think he's been doing some great things during this closure, visiting the parks, visiting the cast members, and I put a lot of faith in him that he knows what needs to happen to get this to work, and he probably's got some ideas that no one's discussed, that we haven't thought of, that no one else has thought of. So it'll be interesting to see.
I mean, we don't have to discuss this, but I'm very curious about how quickly they can staff up and what that process is going to entail. Because we talked about
this last week too.
College program plays into that.
Yep, we talked about this last week. So yeah, certainly. I mean, they're not going to be back to 100% capacity until they get all of the college programs back from which I think is supposed to happen in August. I think, at least the last time I read something in regard to that, I think they're planning to have college program back in August. But yeah, I mean, until they have a full full slate of cast members to operate the parks, they can't be at 100% capacity. So certainly I think, and I mean, you've got cast members who've been furloughed who maybe have found another job. Maybe they don't want to come back. Maybe they're tired of the company. Maybe they, you know, are annoyed and don't want to come work at Disney anymore. So, you know, there's a lot of questions in regard to how long it will actually take them to get back to where they can accommodate 100% capacity. Not even whether it's safe to have 100% capacity, but until the parks are staffed up enough to be able to accommodate 100% capacity crowd. And another, I want to talk, I don't want to talk about this. I want to throw this out there as a potential topic for next week, and see what you guys think, especially Marcy, you and David being DVC members. I'm a DVC member. They've implemented some rules with DVC that aren't the most, you know, member-friendly, I would say, in terms of what you can do with your points. They've done some things with banking and borrowing that, you know, during the closure and extending expiration of things, but they've also done some things that limit borrowing of points and stuff. And obviously this is an unprecedented situation, and you know, none of these contingency plans have been contemplated, and were certainly not part of the original DVC contracts. But I think there's a lot that can be talked about in terms of what DVC members are going to face when the parks reopen, and how DVC members are going to be able to plan trips and book things and stuff. So, you know, if the two of you are available next week, we can talk about that next week, and we'll try to get a fourth DVC member on here for next week to discuss that.
Yeah, I was disappointed when I heard some of that stuff, so yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely worth talking about. But I don't want to talk about it today because we're already at over 2 hours, and that could be another 45-minute discussion. I want to open the floor for anybody that has anything else they want to talk about in regards to what we discussed, and then have a fun little thing to do to end the show when we're ready for that.
I'm good.
Nothing else?
I'm good.
All right. So this being the end of WDWNT's Hollywood Studios Appreciation Week, with the Hollywood Studios anniversary being 2 days ago, May 1st, I thought we should do some little shout-out kind of thing to Hollywood Studios. Not a long discussion, but maybe let's just talk about, I don't know, what's a favorite memory of yours from Hollywood Studios? We'll go around. Go ahead, Ashley, why don't you go first?
Oh, okay. Well, the first two that spring to mind is one, I have two. One, my family's first trip back when it was still MGM Studios, and going to the Indiana Stunt Show with my family, and my mom getting picked to be one of the extras in the show, and her being so excited, but she didn't know what it meant, but she was so excited to be picked out of all the people and had an absolute blast. And it was so cool for our family because she doesn't generally do things like that, but magic of Disney and people being outside of their comfort zones. That was a really great family memory. And then also Stage 89, the day that we actually spent at studios. We did a game where everybody had to film a video of doing a script that was written and made like a little YouTube movie. It was fantastic. We had such a great time just hanging out at Backlot and, you know, waiting for everybody to come in, and all the collaborative teamwork. It was a really special day at Stage 89, the day at studios.
Go ahead, David.
So I think I classify this under best memories, and also the thing that I miss most about studios was the Millionaire Show. being able to participate in that. And just, that was an attraction that you could do over and over and over. So that's something that I miss. And I also miss the concept of those type of shows within studio. I mean, I like some of the directions that they've going. Galaxy's Edge, I do like a lot, but I miss those type of production shows that were popular once.
Marcy's going to say, when David was on Millionaire, that was her favorite memory.
Well, not quite because he lost, but we could have gone on a cruise. No, but it was actually, I have a couple memories. One memory did involve Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. We went on a really large family reunion trip in 2001, and the family was in MGM that day, and there was like 20 of us, so we would meet up for like a lunch or dinner every day, and we would all be in the same park, but not necessarily together. So we were walking past Millionaire, and the cast member like reached out to me and said, "Hey, there's somebody on Millionaire. You need to answer the question. You're the phone a friend." So I get on there, and the person in the hot seat's my father, and so he when he asked the question, I'm like, "Dad?" so
That's awesome.
I was like, "Hi, Dad," and then so he asked me the question, and I'm like, "I don't know," and then I could hear him like yelling because he was mad that he got me because I didn't know the answer. So that was really funny. And then it's similar to Dave's because I actually Dave normally does not like audience participation at all, but I enjoy it, and I actually really miss like Superstar Television, and I was too young at the time to be picked to be in any of those shows. But after that one, that was kind of finished. I think actually Dave and I were on our honeymoon. We went to see Doug live, and I was actually picked from the audience to be in the Beats concert. So that was actually really fun.
Cool. All right, I guess I'm last. I have one more. One of them.
I have one more.
Sorry,
I was going to say, I have one more before Jason, before you go, because I just remembered.
Yeah, I just have one more. So another thing that I actually regret is that I remember being in MGM with my parents when I was young, and they were filming that like 90s iteration of the Mickey Mouse Club or the Mickey Mouse Clubhouse or whatever it was, and they needed kids to be in the audience, and they wanted me to come in, but I was like way too shy to do it, so I didn't go, and I like regret that for the rest of my life. I wish I had done it. That was when like Justin Timberlake and like all like Jennifer Love Hewitt and all the teeny bopper kids were in it. So yeah, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ash.
Okay, I'm done.
Sorry, I remembered one more, and how could I forget? But Great Movie Ride closing is probably it's not a great happy memory, but it was probably
amazing,
I think it was that was the moment where my husband accepted just how truly crazy I was, because I remember the news broke that it was closing. And I was at work when I heard, and I came home from work that day, and I said, I'm going, because, we only had like 2 weeks. I was like, I'm going to Disney this weekend. And he goes, I'm sorry, what? I said, I'm going to Disney this weekend. Okay, why? And I had to explain to him why on like a Thursday I was leaving in 2 days to go to Walt Disney World for approximately 18 hours. Just so that I could be sure that I could ride Great Movie Ride more time before it closed. And we rode it like 4 times. My sister and I, we met up with some friends. We flew down there. We were only there for like 18 hours, and we spent probably the most time that I've ever spent in studios, apart from Stage 89, on a trip. And it was just the year before, or 2 years before. 2 years before. But yeah, that was the moment where my husband accepted just how crazy I was. And it's one of those things that I'm still sad to see it go, but I'm very glad I got to experience it as bittersweet as it was. to say goodbye to it and close the attraction. Although I am sad that I didn't get to go to our party at the attraction.
Our party was better.
It was better, but I had already booked everything by the time Tom announced our party, so I was stuck.
Yep.
But I still got to say goodbye.
Yeah, no, it's very important to say goodbye.
That party was the closest we've ever come to just driving down to Florida on a moment's notice.
I know, and I did it. I remember we were talking about renting an RV and stuff.
We were, yeah. Exactly.
Yes, because I was trying to talk you to stopping in Georgia to pick me up.
Stopping to pick you up.
That would have been amazing.
Absolutely.
Yep.
No, David and Marcy and I were going to rent an
road
RV
trip.
and drive. And I ended up driving down. We drove down for that weekend, because I think flights were expensive. That's with that little lead time. But we drove down. Tom and I were putting the show on. I couldn't miss it, so I was going to go no matter what, and my family was like, yeah, we'll go. Let's get in the car, and we did. So, yeah, that's one of the best memories. Let's see. 8 years before that was the studio's 20th anniversary, and WDW Celebrations had a big event for the 20th anniversary, and we did the backlot tour. And so the beginning of the backlot tour, where you go and they have the water tank thing, that was all still there. And so we had worked out with the cast members ahead of time that all the people that were going to be in that show, the water boat thing, were going to be picked from our group. And so we had all of our group in that show, and it was really cool to see people that I knew in that show. And that was, I think that might have been the last time that I actually saw that show, because it had closed not too long afterwards. So that's one of my favorite memories. And then the other one is going to Osborne Lights during the last season of Osborne Lights. Another really sad time, but amazing nonetheless. And a friend of mine was able to get me to be able to go backstage to the control booth at Osborne Lights, and to see how they run that show from this little control booth with like 2 computers in it is mind-blowing. So that was a pretty amazing experience too. But Osborne Lights is still one of my favorite things, and sadly it's gone, never to return. But yeah, a lot of great memories from studios. All right, well, that I think will do it for this week's episode of Pressing Issues. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you very much for those who gave us donations in the Super Chat. It means a lot to us. Thank you for watching. I think we definitely had our biggest numbers ever this week, although it's only our 4th week of the show. We had our biggest numbers ever tuned in live, so thank you all out there for tuning in and watching us rant and rave about things. Thank you for participating in the chat. Tune in next week, where if as long as David and Marcy can make it back, we're going to talk about some DVC issues with regard to the coronavirus closure and how that impacts us in using our points. So all the DVC members out there, be sure to tune in. Let's see. I don't know. Oh, what else were we gonna talk about this week? Let me see. I don't remember. I thought there was one more thing that we might have planned to talk. No, that was it.
I don't remember.
We got everything on this. Yeah, we did it. We hit it all on this week. So DVC next week, and then whatever else happens in the meantime, I'm sure something of interest will happen that we can jabber on for an hour or more about. But thank you, Marcy. I hope you enjoyed your first episode of Pressing Issues. Thanks, David, for coming back. Thanks, Ashley. A big shout out to Kevin Lake, who's been our producer, running things behind the scenes, chatting with people in the chat. Thanks, Kevin, for making this all happen without a lot of effort on my part. Again, thank you all for watching. Tune in again next week for Pressing Issues from WDW News Today.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Good night.